You've made great emphasis about the convention. I was very struck when Ms. Cherry was asking her question that this, of course, is the 75th anniversary this week of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that gift of Eleanor Roosevelt, Rennie Cassin and the others. And why did we do that? It was in the aftermath of the Holocaust and all the horrors that had beset the world, and those 30 articles came from that, but so did the convention in 1951, as you've rightly said, and you come from the tradition of David Maxwell Fyfe and Winston Churchill. Churchill himself said that we must be in the centre of the movement that stands for the idea of a Charter of Human Rights guarded by freedom and sustained by law. And he said moral concepts will be able to win the respect and recognition of mankind. And I get the impression from everything that you have said from your days in Middle Temple that you believe in that too. And you said a few moments ago, we're in it, so therefore we should comply. Now, how does that measure up against the statement by the Home Secretary on the floor of the House that he can't sign off the compatibility of this bill with the Convention rights? And indeed the contradiction that then came on December the 6th when he said it is absolutely certain that the bill is in accordance with international law. How can those two statements be reconciled? And isn't it odd that for the second time in 1 year we have the government saying this is a bill that is not compatible with the Convention? For 40 years now in both houses I've seen ministers like you, good men and women, who have been proud to stand up and say that legislation is compatible, that we're in it, and so therefore we should comply. Are you proud of the fact that twice in 1 year on very controversial pieces of legislation we've not been able to get sign-off by ministers?
Respectfully, lots of very important points in there. So the first thing is, yes, if you're in it, you should comply. I just want to make one brief point about that. The risk, it's probably not what everyone wants to think about on a Wednesday afternoon, but thinking back to our 18th century constitutional history, it was Edmund Burke, who incidentally is, on one view, the father of conservatism. He said, a state without the means of some change is also without the means of its conservation. So he was effectively arguing in favour of cautious, incremental recalibration. Now, the reason I make that point is, who knows what happens in the future about how we reframe the convention? And there's a perfectly legitimate argument to say that things need to evolve. After all, the times they are changing and all that the world is very different compared to as it was in the ashes of the Second World War. And indeed, when I've been to Strasbourg, I've been to the Council of Europe in Riga and elsewhere, and we have such an open, sensible, constructive dialogue with our colleagues, which includes conversations about, where's the convention going? So I make that point. But the first one is, yes, when you've got those, you've got the convention, then we should comply with it. Your second point was, well, that's all very interesting, but you want to do a 19.1b, I think, to paraphrase effectively what you're saying. Yeah. I think it's very important to be clear what 19.1b is and what it isn't. So there are examples, of course, of that being invoked out of an abundance of caution, even where you think there is a perfectly proper argument that you are in the convention. If I could just give that example, one thinks of...
Just decode for that. Are you
yes,
saying
I will explain.
that the Home Secretary's saying he can't certify it's compatible with the bill, but it might be that it is. It might just be he's being very cautious.
What he's saying is
that's a bit odd, isn't it?
Hang on, let me, if I could just make the point. So just as the late and much missed and great, Tessa Jowell, if I remember in 2003, I think it was the Communications Act, there was a 19.1b statement there because there was a case in the ECHR, I think it was VTG in Switzerland. This was about, as I recall, this was about political advertising, funding of paid political advertising. And as a result of that case, she couldn't give a 19.1a statement. It was a 19.1b. The Communications Act and the case arising out of it was litigated, and the UK ended up winning. But I think it was 9-8. It was a very, very close judgment. So what, as the Secretary of State then did, and what the modern Secretary of State is doing, is saying, look, there is a perfectly respectable argument that it's compatible, but I can't 19.1a it because we accept this is novel. We accept it's novel, and we're being very upfront about that. But we also think, for the reason, at the risk of repeating myself, which I won't do, but because of the way it's been calibrated and designed and the careful path that it's steered, it remains within the convention. But because it's novel, out of an abundance of clarity, transparency, but yes, caution, we've 19.1b'd it.
But in accordance with what you've just said about being upfront, can you spell out for the committee, therefore, the sections of the bill that you think might not be in compliance?
Well, no, it's not about specific sections. You have to look at the bill in the round and make a decision about whether you can say, effectively, for sure, that this is in compliance. That's what Section 91 is. The central point I'm making is that there have been examples in the past where British ministers, in good faith, and this is, by the way, what you would expect of a British minister.
Just Lord Alton was saying, can you identify any specific parts of the bill as opposed to other parts?
Well, no,
and
no,
you're saying no, it's
well,
about the bill as a whole.
You do have to look at the bill as a whole, but plainly the bits that people would be, we can look at the bill together if you want, but where, for example, we say in the bill to the point that Ms Cherry was making about disapplication of the Human Rights Act, there might be some who will make an argument to say that this means that you're not in compliance with the convention. We say, no, we think we are. And we think that, first of all, we think we're right. We think there's a very reasonable argument to that effect. But I actually take some reassurance from the fact that a British minister doesn't metaphorically stick his chest out and says, absolutely right, we're absolutely in compliance. He says, yes, this is novel. Some people will say this is contentious, but we think there's a perfectly respectable argument to say it's on the right side of the line. That's why we're using 19(1)B.
Order.